Hello, and welcome to the movie universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. Today, I'll be doing something really special. It is October, and it is the perfect time to do a monster movie. So, I decided to talk about one of the most legendary monster movies of all time, The Tingler. This simple film made back in 1959 is so legendary, there aren't too many people who don't know about it. It's also one of the films where legendary actor Vincent Price shows what a great actor he really was. The story starts with legendary film director and producer William Castle coming right onto the screen warning us that there is a creature unlike anything that you can imagine, a creature that will give you a tingling feeling in your spine, warning you that if you do not scream, it will get you. So if you feel the urge to scream, go ahead and do it, because believe me, you're not going to be the only one screaming. He even warns you that a scream might save your life. And we see a whole bunch of faces screaming right at us until we see a man with a really twisted face who is being led to the electric chair. We then cut to Vincent Price, who is doing an autopsy on the man who was just electrocuted. He's a doctor, a pathologist, and of course a scientist. And he has reasons to believe that people can die as a result of fear. And not just any type of ordinary fear, a type of fear that conjures something up deep within inside us. Something powerful, something living, something that just cannot be explained. While he's doing the autopsy, the executed man's brother is there watching, and the good doctor is, of course, talking to him about this. The man's name is Ollie, and believe it or not, he actually hints at the perfect name for this force, whatever it is, the Tingler. He talks about that tingling feeling in your spine, to which the doctor, whose name is Warren Chapin, thinks it over, and since there is no official name for it, what a perfect name, the Tingler. When he's done with the autopsy, he talks about some of his findings, and what he found on the executed man was very interesting. His spinal column was cracked, meaning that something very powerful had a good grip on his spine, powerful enough to crack his bones. The doctor had been studying this phenomenon for years, and he's been trying to figure it out, mostly because he wants to know, what is this thing? What causes this to happen? The most that he seemed to determine is fear seems to cause this to happen, and apparently by screaming, it seems to subside. How and why he doesn't know. And not to mention what it is exactly, he doesn't know either. But like any other scientist, he's not too concerned about finding out what it is exactly right here, right now, because he knows sooner or later it will reveal itself, and he will be able to document it. He takes Ollie home to where we find out he lives right above a movie theater which he owns. He and his wife, Martha. His wife is a deaf mute, and she has a horrible fear of blood. So much so that she actually passed out when Vincent Price accidentally cut his hand. The doctor brings her around and then he leaves. When he gets home, he talks to his sister-in-law, Lucy Stevens. She's practically like a daughter to him. I say that because she's obviously very young, and the way he speaks to her, it's almost like a father-daughter relationship going on there. They talk about her older sister, Isabel, who is his wife, what a pretentious snob she is, and the fact that she doesn't let Lucy be who she wants to be and marry who she wants to marry. She's even keeping her inheritance from her. Their father had died years before, enough said, and not to mention she is clearly cheating on the good doctor. The doctor tells Lucy that he will have a talk with her over this, and just then, Lucy's boyfriend, David Morris, comes in. David is not only her boyfriend, he's also the good doctor's assistant. For a little bit, they talk about the Tingler, and of course about Ollie's wife, mostly because of the way she reacted to his cut hand and the way she fainted, because there was something just not normal about it. After they're done talking, David and Lucy go out on a date, while the doctor waits up for his wife to come home. Later that night, she does come home, and the doctor sees her out in the front in the arms of another man. He grabs a gun and he waits for her. When she walks in the door, He talks to her about how she's been cheating her sister of her inheritance and how she keeps butting in, keeping her from real happiness. To which she replies that she will make sure that Lucy never marries David Morris. It is at this point the doctor pulls out the gun and he tells her to go to his lab, which he has built into the house. He says that it would be easier to take care of business there. And after basically calling her for what she really is, a wretch, a cheat, and all kinds of things, he fires the gun. She falls to the floor. He picks her up, takes her to the x-ray machine, and he takes 3 pictures of her spine. Then he wakes her up. Oh, did you think he killed her? No, of course not. He just needed a test subject to experiment on, and she was the perfect test subject for him. Especially considering the fact that she did deserve this. He even said so himself that she was the perfect test subject, to which she replies that when her time comes, and it will, that she won't just scare him, she'll kill him. The next morning, David comes back to the doctor's home, and the doctor has something really special to show him. Those 3 x-rays he took of his wife. They show a small mass that growed to an immense size to cover the spinal column. It looked like it had little legs. Quite an amazing thing to find on an x-ray. But of course they needed more. They needed a subject and a specimen to experiment on, to see what it is, what it's made of, and all that stuff. The doctor tries to experiment on himself to see how powerful this thing really is. He deliberately injects himself with LSD so he could have horrible nightmares, so he could get an idea as to how powerful this thing really is. After a few tense minutes, the doctor is starting to lose it, and he is trying so hard not to scream, but he couldn't help it. The pain was just too severe where he ended up screaming, and he passes out. When he comes to, he tells David and Lucy about what it felt like. It was immensely painful. He couldn't even believe how strong this thing really was. He came to the conclusion that no one could possibly stand anything like this without screaming, except maybe one person, or a type of person, like a deaf mute. So he goes to Ollie and Martha's home to check up on her. He gives her a sedative to relax her, and he gives a prescription to Ollie to get her some sleeping pills so she can get enough sleep and get over this nervous tension. Later that night, Martha wakes up to find horrors in her place. Lights are going on and off, chairs are rocking out of nowhere. The window just shuts itself. The doors are opening and closing. She sees a horrible figure with a machete in her husband's bed. She even sees a hand with an axe and he throws it at her. And then she gets to the bathroom and she sees blood in the sink and blood in the bathtub and a bloody hand and arm just creeping right out of the tub. She tries to scream, but since she's mute, she can't, and she falls over and dies. We then cut to the next scene where the doctor is at home talking to his wife, and Ollie shows up at his door saying that he wants her to look at his wife because he found her on the floor, and because it's so late, he's the only one he could turn to. They take her to the lab, and he examines her, and he finds that she's dead. The doctor asks Ollie the usual questions, like how old was she, how did you find her, that sort of thing, so he could write a coroner's report out. He also mentions to Ollie that something strange happened because he saw a horrible look on her face, like she was terrified. Just then, something very strange happens. She starts to rise up underneath the sheet that's laid above her, like she's trying to sit up. Ollie thinks that she's alive. The doctor, of course, he had to check her, and no, she's dead. But what could have caused this? Of course, he had to know. So he asks permission to examine her. Ollie gives the doctor his permission, and the doctor starts on his autopsy right away, and he removes the Tingler. He tries to put it in a glass tank so he could observe it, but before he could, the Tingler grabs a hold of his arm, and the pain was immense. It had a gorilla grip on his arm, so powerful that the doctor screamed in pain, to which the creature let go. He then grabs the thing and puts it in a steel cage, mostly because the tank got broken in the process, but at the same time, it was definitely a better place to put it. Isabel comes in and asks what happened, but of course what they don't see or know is that she grabs a bottle from the doctor's table. The doctor tells Ollie to take his wife's body to the mortician to be given her proper burial, and that he should call the police and let them know what happened to her, because it's the proper thing to do. While the doctor's telling Ollie this, Isabel slips a barbiturate in the doctor's drink and convinces him to drink it. He falls asleep. Isabel then grabs the cage holding the Tingler, puts it right down next to him, and opens it. Of course, she leaves because she doesn't want to be in the way of this thing. The Tingler comes out, crawls on the doctor, and starts strangling him. Fortunately, Lucy comes home and screams when she sees the thing. The next morning, we find that the doctor and David were experimenting on the thing to try to see if they could kill it. They put the Tingler back in the cage, and the doctor says, "We can't kill it. Nothing affects it, except screaming." David says the scientists won't believe this, and the doctor says they're not going to know about it. The doctor had come to the conclusion that what they did was wrong. Even though he was just trying to prove that this thing existed, he really sees how dangerous this thing is. It's ugly, just like man's fears. It's dangerous because a frightened man is dangerous. The only thing they could try to do is put it back where it came from, and that would mean putting it back in Martha's body. Hopefully it'll stay subsided. Maybe it'll even kill it. The doctor asks David to try and find out where she's buried or if she's at the mortician so he can try and put the Tingler back in her. While that's going on, Lucy talks to the doctor and says that Isabel is gone. She's packed everything and left. His response to that was, "Well, hopefully she'll find happiness wherever she goes." When David hangs up the phone, he tells the doctor that Ollie never turned Martha in to the mortician or even the police. So there's only one place that she just might be. The doctor goes to their home where Ollie's packing his suitcase and all the money that they made out of the movie theater, and he's getting ready to go. The doctor shows up and he asks him, "Where is she?" He finds her, and he finds the props that he used to scare her to death. Of course, Ollie tries to justify his actions by saying, "You don't know what it was like living with her, Doc. She even tried to kill me a few times." To which the doc says, "I can relate to that." And while the doctor's trying to get ready to put the Tingler back in, the Tingler breaks out of its cage and disappears. When they get back there, they find that it had squirmed down a loose floorboard that leads right to the theater. The audience is watching a silent movie, and they're engulfed in the story. The Tingler is sneaking in and creeping towards this one young lady. It has a hold of her leg, and she screams. The doctor turns out the lights, and everything goes black. Just then he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, a young woman has fainted. There's no need for alarm. She's being attended to. We will continue the movie starting right now." The lights are back on, the Tingler is gone, and the doctor and Ollie are in the theater trying to find it. We're then in the projection booth where the man who operates the projector is checking the film, making sure it's running smoothly so the movie doesn't just stop. While he's doing this, the Tingler sneaks in. The film stops and the Tingler scurries right across the camera, right on the big screen where you can see it. The film goes black, and then all of a sudden we hear Vincent Price say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Tingler's loose in the theater. Please scream all you can so you can stop it." And you hear a whole bunch of screams and cries, shouting like, "It's got my leg! It's on the seat!" All that kind of stuff. And then he says, "Your screams have paralyzed it, so we can now go back to the movie." To which we do. And the doctor says, "Projection booth." He and Ollie run to the projection booth where the Tingler has the projectionist right by the throat. Just then, the man lets out a scream and the thing just falls to the floor. They grab it, put it inside a film canister, and they take it to Ollie's apartment where the doctor puts it back in Martha. Now that the task was done, the doctor says he and Ollie are going to go to the police. Ollie pulls a gun and says, "You're going to have to go by yourself, Doc." The doctor tells him, "Ollie, the minute I walk out this door, I'm just going to call the police." And he basically gestures that he doesn't care, and he insists that he just leaves. So the doctor leaves. He goes down the stairs, and we see Ollie pick up his suitcase. He walks to the door, and it shuts. And then the window shuts. And then Martha sits up. The blanket falls off her head, and we see this horrible look on her face. She slowly turns, looking right at Ollie. And Ollie, he is frozen in fear. So frozen he can't even scream, and she is creeping towards him, and we're getting a close-up of Ollie's face, and then the screen goes black. While the screen is black, we get one final word from Vincent Price saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, just a word of warning. If you are not convinced that you have a Tingler of your own, the next time you're frightened in the dark, don't scream." A fantastic movie, a movie unlike any other. In fact, it is so unique that it's absolutely amazing. This movie has stood the test of time for 60 years now. because of the way it was done. Technically, it's what you would call a B movie, but just like The Blob, it had superseded everyone's expectations. What makes the movie so great is the cast. As I have often said, when you get the right cast in a movie, it can be amazing. And this movie definitely has an amazing cast. The first and most obvious, the Doctor himself, played by the legendary Vincent Price. His part in this picture is absolutely incredible. Like I said before, it really shows what a great actor he was. Because when we get to the scene where he drugs himself so he could get scared, you could almost sense that he really is scared. The way he is reaching out as if the walls were closing in on him, and he's trying to keep the walls at bay so they don't close in on him. And when he screams, it sounds legit. Not to mention the look on his face when the Tingler grabs him and starts strangling him. That twisted look on his face says it all. His assistant, David Morris, is played by Daryl Hinkman. This guy has been in a lot of great pictures, such as The Grapes of Wrath, Leave Her to Heaven, and even shows like The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. He plays his part perfectly, as a scientist and assistant, and as a lover. I say that because he's Lucy's boyfriend. But there's actually another reason as to why he plays that part so well. Because, truth be told, Lucy, who is played by Pamela Lincoln, was actually his fiancée in real life at that time. So when those two kiss, it's real. There's not much I could say about Pamela Lincoln other than that she plays her part really well as a girl who's concerned about her brother-in-law and about her future husband. There's not much I could say about her career other than that she was in a movie called Tootsie, another film called Anatomy of a Psycho, and a soap opera called The Doctors. The Doctor's wife, Isabel, is played by Patricia Cutts. She isn't really a huge part of this story, but she does play it really well. For instance, when she first walks into the door, you get that sense of wow, because she is a knockout. There's no denying that. But at the same time, she plays that cool, conniving wife who just wants to see her husband dead. Perfect choice. Her story is actually kind of interesting because actually she was an English actress who made lots of pictures and appeared in quite a few TV shows and soap operas. And sadly, back in 1974, she committed suicide. Ollie is played by Philip Coolidge. You would probably recognize him because he appeared in a ton of Alfred Hitchcock films. I found him to be one of the most interesting characters next to the Doctor because here he comes off as this guy who's just trying to help the Doctor. He has an interest in the Tingler. He comes off as really mild-mannered, you know? And then when we find out he was the one who killed his wife, we see that there's more to him than we thought. But even after the Doctor finds out that he killed his wife, Ollie still tries to help him, which is one of the things I find so interesting. Most people would have just said, okay, that's out of my hands. The Tingler's not my concern. I'll just run. But no, he stays and he helps him capture it. Pretty interesting, huh? Ollie's wife, Martha, is played by Judith Evelyn, a great actress who appeared in 50 films. As Martha, she was perfect. She does her best to keep silent. If I didn't know any better, I could have sworn she really was mute. And the way she falls over from passing out and the twisted looks on her face when she sees the horrors in her apartment, that's what you call good acting right there. And I'll be honest, when she rises up and looks at Ollie and heads towards him, that's enough to actually scare me, 'cause that horrible look she's got in her eyes. You just take one look at that face and tell me that doesn't send a chill down your spine. But as important as the cast is, the biggest credit must go to William Castle. The way he directed it and the way he literally launched it to the audience is something unlike anything that has ever been done before. This man was a real showman. He's been described as the P.T. Barnum of movie theaters. And with good reason, because not only did he create such amazing pictures like this on extremely low budgets, he had a way to get the audience involved. Let me give you an example. Before this film was released, William Castle and Vincent Price made another movie called House on Haunted Hill. In that movie, there's a scene where a skeleton comes out of a vat of acid. And what happened was, when the audience was watching that scene, they had a skeleton float right above the people in the movie theater. And when they caught a glimpse of it, they freaked. I've even heard some stories that in some places they couldn't exactly afford to do that, so they just had a guy in the back of the audience grab a fake skeleton and launch it right there in the front, and people were not expecting that, so they start screaming and panicking. And when they realized it was just a fake skeleton, they laughed it off. Only William Castle would have done something like that. And as far as I know, he's the only one that ever did do anything like that. He tried so hard to connect with the audience that before the Tingler was released, he did a commercial saying that the audience will be a part of this movie. You always hear about the directors who try to reach out to the audience to try to connect with them, but this guy took it to a whole new level. He tried to get people so entertained by watching his movies, he went to that extra effort to scare the pants off of you. Now I know what you're going to ask. What did he do to the audience in this movie? Well, I'll start with an obvious one. The scene of blood, where it's all red, and yet this movie is black and white. Obviously, looking at that, it would definitely get your attention. It would make you go, oh my god, which is just what he wanted. And in case you're wondering how they got the red blood in that scene, it's really quite simple. They shot that moment in color, and they just spliced that color film in. But that was just the beginning, because there were more tricks that William Castle had up his sleeve. You know that scene where Vincent Price turns off the lights and says a woman has just fainted? Well, they actually had a plant in the audience who would actually faint on cue, and they would have doctors and nurses come in, check her over, and take her out of the movie theater, just to give you that little extra effect. The third and final thing he did to the audience was the part where the Tingler goes across the screen and then everything goes black and Vincent Price is warning you that the Tingler is loose in the theater. Obviously, that happening just after that woman fainting right in the audience, that would definitely get you. It would catch you off guard. People would start worrying, and many even started screaming. Now, people were screaming because of the scene itself. It was a very tense moment, and it was all deliberately set up the way it was. But there was a little more to it than met the eye. How they really managed to pull this off was a little device that William Castle came up with called Percepto. It was basically a little vibrator that they attached to the bottom of the theater chair, and when they pushed the button at the right time, it would vibrate the chair, and you wouldn't hear it, but you would actually feel it. And they did this at just the right moments where things are real tense, and most notably, when the Tingler goes across the screen and you hear Vincent Price telling you that the Tingler's in the theater. Of course, Percepto wasn't used on all the theater seats because that would have been very expensive and it would have taken a lot of time to do. Instead, they put it under a random number of seats, which worked out perfectly because anyone who was sitting on one of those theater seats that had the Percepto device attached to it was gonna scream. And the people next to them were going to scream too because that person is screaming. It's just a simple chain reaction. When one person screams, the people around them scream. And when it was all over, people were laughing about it because it was great. Think of it like going to a haunted house attraction. You go there to get your pants scared off, right? Right. As Vincent Price said in a documentary once, people went to movies so they could get scared. That was the whole fun of it. And here's an interesting little fact for you. They used this same gimmick with the Tingler going across the screen in the drive-in movies. However, they couldn't use the Percepto because these were people's cars. Obviously, they couldn't rig that up. So instead, they changed the voiceover when the screen goes black. Instead of using Vincent Price, William Castle himself did it. And since this was done at the drive-in movies, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, turn on your headlights. The Tingler is in the drive-in movie theater." And you hear glass breaking and people screaming, "Oh my God, it's breaking a window. Oh my God, it's in the car." And all that screaming and stuff. And of course, it ends with William Castle saying, "The Tingler has now been subsided by your screams." I rewatched this movie with my dad quite recently, and he remembered it like it was yesterday. He was there for the fun part of the Percepto and the people screaming in the audience. These days, they could re-show it in theaters, and some theaters do. But without the Percepto, it just lacks that ooh, ah moment. You know what I'm saying? It takes a real showman to try and set up something like this. And William Castle was just that showman. So if you ever get the chance, check this movie out. Believe me, you are gonna love it. And remember this word of warning. If you are not convinced that you have a Tingler of your own, The next time you're frightened in the dark, don't scream.